If you're having the same argument over and over again, the problem is not what you're arguing about. Instead, it's what you're not talking about. So most couples think that they're fighting about the same thing over and over again, and it's usually the dishes or money or sex or parenting or the in-laws or even communication. But after working with couples for years, I can tell you this, something that probably will surprise you, as it surprises most people, that most repetitive arguments have very little, if anything, to do with the surface issue. Because the argument was really about something different. If it was about the dishes, it would have been solved the first time someone actually did the dishes, right? If it was really about the text message, then that would have been resolved after the text was sent. If it was really about being late, then it would have been solved the first time that partner arrived on time. But that's not what happens. The argument instead keeps coming and coming back again and again and again. And so underneath all of these repetitive argument patterns is usually what we call an unmet need, an unresolved wound, or a painful story. And that keeps getting activated. And until you address that underneath what that argument is, you're going to continue having the same fight for years. And that's not because, you're incompatible or you're not getting along. It's because you're solving the wrong problem. I'm Jenn Pinkerton. I'm a psychotherapist and connection expert. I help people stop repeating the same painful patterns and start building healthier, more connected relationships where you thrive. So getting back into this, one of the most frustrating things that I hear from couples might be we keep having the same fight and I'm tired of it. Different day, different circumstance, same argument, same pattern, and same hurt feelings, same frustration, same outcome. And eventually couples will start wondering, maybe this isn't the person I should be with because we're never going to be able to resolve anything. But the good news is that repetitive arguments are usually actually incredibly predictable. And that predictability gives us something really to work with. Because when you understand what's actually happening underneath that predictability, underneath the surface, you can finally begin breaking the cycle. So I worked with a couple recently, and they swore their biggest problem was the household responsibilities, the division of labor, the hierarchy and structure of who does what. And so every week they argued about chores, laundry, dishes, cleaning, scheduling. In this circumstance, the wife felt so overwhelmed and completely unsupported. But yet the husband also felt criticized and as though he was never enough. So every conversation ended the exact same way. She would pursue and go after it. He would defend. She would escalate. He would withdraw. And then weeks became months, and months have actually become years. Same issues. So eventually I asked her a very simple question. What does it mean to you when he doesn't help? And she immediately started crying. There was so much emotional content and pain behind that. She said, it makes me feel alone. And then I turned to him and I asked, what does it mean to you when she criticizes you? And he said, it makes me feel like no matter what I do, I will never be enough for her. And you see what's happening here? Because suddenly we're not talking about dishes anymore. We're talking about loneliness. We're talking about inadequacy. We're talking about wounds. We're talking about attachment pain. And once we got to this actual issue, everything started to change. So because most of these repetitive arguments are not about that surface issue, they're not about the complaint. They're about the feeling underneath the complaint. Lesson 1 in this, because I'm going to give you some lessons. Lesson 1, stop solving the surface issue. So one of the biggest mistakes couples make is you're trying to solve the content of the argument. You're going directly to the argument and instead of the meaning behind it. I call this going to the feeling. And so people spend years focusing on the symptom while completely missing the underlying cause. So your partner complains about chores and you focus on chores. So your partner complains about texting. So then you focus on texting. Your partner complains about how they feel about intimacy or lack thereof. So you focus on intimacy. Yet somehow the argument keeps returning and the pain is not receding. The reason it keeps returning is because the surface issue is rarely the real issue. So most complaints are actually derived from some emotional messaging that is disguised as some practical surface level complaint. There's the primary emotion and the secondary emotion. Secondary is up here on the surface. Primary is down here. And primary here is you never help around the house. But instead, they're talking about something so much deeper than dishes or laundry or cleaning. They may be talking about feeling alone. They may be talking about not being seen with their emotional or mental load. They may be talking about carrying that all by themselves. They may be talking about feeling unsupported and, again, unseen or overwhelmed. So similarly, when your partner says, you never listen to me, they may not be asking you to hear more words. They may be telling you they don't feel important or valued or prioritized. And this is why I often tell couples that the complaint is the doorway, but the feeling is the destination. So most couples spend years arguing at the level of the complaint. Again, on the surface, on that secondary, and they never take the time to explore that emotional experience underneath it. They don't go deep enough. They debate facts and timelines and responsibilities, and one person's usually a better arguer or debater than the other. They argue about the details while the actual wound remains completely untouched. And the breakthrough is going to happen when you stop asking, what are we arguing about? And start asking, what is this issue making my partner feel? That question changes everything, because now we are moving the conversation away from the complaint and from problem solving to understanding and going deeper. And that understanding is often where healing begins. So as you're listening to this, if you're wondering what patterns might be applying to you that keep showing up in your own relationship, I have created a free PRHI quiz. It's the Pinkerton Relational Health Index. And this quiz is going to help you identify your relationship strengths, your blind spots, the areas that you might need to focus on and work on, might be communication patterns and wounds, and the areas that might be contributing to this reoccurring conflict. You can actually download it by using the link below. So now we're into lesson 2, and this is Stop the DDDP. And if you've listened to me some, I talk about this a lot. This is something I've come up with, and I'm going to explain it here, because the second reason people argue and things aren't resolved is because they spend more time protecting themselves in defensive patterns than understanding each other. This is the DDDP, and this will take over the conversation. So what does that stand for? Defending, denying, deflecting, explaining, and proving. And we all love to do that. Most people don't do these things because they're bad partners. They're doing what is natural and normal to us. They do them because they feel threatened. We don't feel safe. We feel attacked. We feel criticized. We feel misunderstood. We feel blamed. We feel judged. And so our nervous system takes over. Immediate shift into self-preservation and self-protection mode. And the problem is, while you're busy protecting yourself from this perceived, keyword perceived, threat, your partner is feeling increasingly alone. Imagine your partner says, I felt hurt when that happened. And instead of becoming curious and leaning in about their experience, you immediately jump to explaining. You're defending, you're deflecting, you're proving. You tell them what you really meant. You point out how they actually misunderstood you. You remind them of what they did wrong and how they did it last week also. And before long, the conversation is no longer at all about understanding. It's about winning. It's about the fight. And the moment a relationship conversation becomes about winning, both people will lose. So one of the healthiest shifts that couples can make is learning how to become almost like this detective instead of being a lawyer. Lawyers gather evidence. They build arguments. They try a case. They want to prove it. Detectives are curious and interested and quiet, and they're gathering information and seeking and understanding, trying to figure it out. Most repetitive arguments continue because both people are acting like that lawyer mentality. They're trying to convince their partner that their version of reality is correct. But healthy couples don't do that. They become detectives. They get very curious. They are leaning in. They are asking questions. They're connecting dots. They're seeking to understand the experience their partner is having. Because people rarely calm down just because you proved your point, right? They calm down because they finally feel understood. All right, now we're to lesson 3. This is going to the feeling. And if there is one skill that could transform most relationships that I have seen in all of my work, it would be the ability to go to the feeling. Most couples spend years discussing events and almost no time discussing emotions. They talk about what happened, they replay it, they rehash it, who said what, who forgot what, who did what, and who was right and who was wrong. Yet the event itself is rarely what even keeps the argument alive. The feeling underneath that event, that feeling is what is keeping it alive. So a forgotten text message may create feelings of rejection. A canceled date night might trigger feelings of abandonment. A defensive response may create feelings of not mattering. A critical comment may activate feelings of inadequacy. The event is simply the trigger. The emotional meaning attached to the event is the sweet spot. That's where the real pain exists that we have to pay attention to. And this is also why repetitive arguments tend to feel so much bigger than the situation at hand, the actual situation itself. Most people are not just reacting to a current event. They're reacting to what the event represents emotionally for them. So for someone with abandonment wounds, distance may feel absolutely terrifying. For someone with criticism wounds, feeling attacked or getting feedback may be soul-crushing. And for someone with a rejection wound, one little baby small moment of disconnection may feel deeply, rootfully painful. So the argument is often touching something much older, much more before this relationship than even the current circumstance. So when couples learn to ask questions instead, like, what hurt the most about that? What did that mean to you? Or what story were you telling yourself in that moment that I don't see or understand? They finally move beneath the surface. They stop arguing about the event and they start understanding the emotion. And that is where genuine connection, which is what we all need, begins. All right, lesson 4 here. I want you to understand the pattern, not the argument. One of the repetitive reasons or reasons a repetitive argument continues on for years is because couples become just absolutely obsessed with the content of the disagreement. And they probably rehashed it multiple times to friends or family or et cetera, maybe the therapist, and they completely miss the pattern underneath it. But in almost every relationship, conflict will follow a very predictable cycle. One person pursues while the other withdraws. One person criticizes while the other becomes defensive. One person escalates, lashing out perhaps, while the other person shuts down to protect. And the details may change, but that dance, that tango, remains the same. So what's fascinating is that most couples believe their partner is the problem. It's all them. They're pointing the finger. The pursuer believes the withdrawer needs to communicate more. The withdrawer believes that the pursuer needs to calm down. And so both people become locked in and focused on changing the other person. Meanwhile, the actual problem is the cycle, the whole cycle itself. And healthy couples eventually realize that the pattern is the enemy, not each other. And once you begin viewing the cycle as the actual problem instead of your partner, something kind of powerful happens. Instead of attacking each other, you start working together against the pattern. Now you're on the same team. You become teammates again. And the conversation shifts from, how do I get my partner to change, to how do we stop getting trapped in this cycle? How do we stop activating each other's wounds? And that shift alone can dramatically change the direction of a relationship. All right, lesson 5, resolution requires emotional safety. Here is where couples also get stuck. They believe that repetitive arguments happen because they don't know how to communicate or how to talk or how to share. And while communication is, of course, extremely important, and the language we use, which we're going to talk about later, certainly matters, communication is rarely the deepest issue. Emotional safety is. So I want you to think about how difficult it is to be vulnerable if you're feeling judged. Think about how difficult it is to be honest when you expect to be criticized. Think about how hard it is to share your fears, your insecurities, your needs, be vulnerable. You're sharing your disappointments when you believe that they're going to all be dismissed, they're going to all be minimized, or they might even be used against you. Human beings naturally protect themselves when they don't feel safe. This is why so many repetitive arguments never get resolved. The deeper truth never gets spoken. It's like this quiet secret. And instead of saying, I feel alone, someone says, you never help. Instead of saying, I don't feel important to you, they say instead, you're always on your phone. And instead of saying, I'm scared, we're drifting apart, they say, you never want to spend time with me. And never and always. That's part of that language we're going to talk about that gets us in trouble. Because the vulnerable truth stays hidden underneath the complaint. And the healthiest couples create an environment where instead vulnerability is absolutely safe. They create a relationship where concerns can be expressed without any sort of immediate defensiveness, any sort of fear of judgment, where emotions can be shared without the worry, and where both people feel secure and safe enough to reveal what is really going on inside and what's really happening underneath the argument. Because repetitive arguments don't disappear when couples become better debaters, they actually disappear when couples become safer for each other. And that safety emotionally is the key. So that's exactly what I'm going to talk about when I get to my next video. Because if you found this helpful, you're going to love the next one. I'm actually going to show you how to create that emotional safety in your relationship. And because sometimes a repetitive pattern of arguments and this same argument over and over again, that rarely will happen when both people feel safe, understood, and emotionally connected. They're going to happen instead when people feel judged and dismissed and criticized, or even alone. So in that video below, I will show you what emotional safety actually looks like and how you can create the kind of relationship where both people are going to feel safe enough to be vulnerable, honest, and absolutely fully themselves. So click here and watch that video next.